Very important news is here, everybody. Millions of Americans are expected to receive a $500 one-time crisis relief payment stimulus check by September. These new checks can be automatically deposited. Here's some good news on this. Colorado and your state, people are set to receive a stimulus check of $500. If tax returns are filed after June 30th but before October 17th, then people in Colorado will receive the check in cash in January. Now, individual taxpayers will pocket about $500, while joint filers will get a $1,000 payment. The governor said, "We are helping people in Colorado deal with inflation by getting people back their hard-earned money this summer. We are providing immediate relief for hardworking people in the state." Inflation rocketed to 8.6% in May, its highest level since December. The payments are being introduced as part of the Senate bill. Legislation that refunds up to 85% of excess state revenue. Hundreds of thousands of Americans will also get a check in the mailbox. The state of Maine is sending up to 200,000 payments each week under its tax rebate program until everybody gets a check. To qualify for a rebate check in the state, you must meet a few requirements. As far as income goes, as individuals must not exceed $100,000, while heads of the household and couples can make up to $150,000 and $200,000 respectively. These will be based on 2021 tax returns, which must be filed by October 31st. Also, you must not be claimed as a dependent under the tax return to qualify for the rebate. The Department of Administrative Financial Affairs told reporters that it is processing checks at the peak capacity of 200,000 checks per week. There is no specific order by which the payments are going out. And consumer sentiment has hit a record low in June as Americans continue to face elevated gas prices for gas, food, and other services. Inflation, which last increased at the fastest pace in more than 40 years as of May, remained a pressing concern and a key contributor to the further erosion in sentiment. Last week, a conference board survey found that 60% of CEOs said they expect a recession before the end of 2023. Economic teams at the Wall Street firms from Goldman Sachs to Citigroup have also raised their expectation over the risk of a recession over the next year.
Recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Buchanan, to inquire.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to thank you for your service. You and I just talked briefly a few minutes ago, but my passion is really to look at the big picture in terms of debt and deficits. If you look over the last 15 years, everybody talks about reducing the deficits, and that we've ran up almost $20 trillion in debt in the last 15 years or so. So what can we do about that? But also, I want to how does that tie in your opinion, to inflation? The last 4 or 5 years, or last couple of years, we ran into $4 or $5 trillion of additional spending. They like to spend another $2 trillion, but everybody feels in our area that it's impacting inflation in a big year, and it's killing a lot. I'm in Florida, so a lot of our seniors count on a slight raise here and there, and this deficit is really hurting them badly. So what's your thought between spending and inflation? It seems like there's a connection.
Well, so spending has come down. Government spending and the deficit have come down dramatically. We had a substantial response to the pandemic, which was appropriate. It succeeded in getting our economy back to full employment and mitigating a great deal of harm in that way. I think it was very successful. But there's no question that inflation is unacceptably high and we need to get it down. And it's partly a matter of demand and supply. And the Federal Reserve has a primary responsibility.
Madam Secretary, we're just short on time. Let me ask you just quickly, in terms of interest rates rising, it's impacting a lot of people. In the 70s, we had inflation. We used that as I think our major tool to try to tap down inflation. But as you raise interest now, 50 basis points or 100 basis, you're probably talking $300 billion in additional taxes. It doesn't seem like we can continue to raise rates because of the massive deficits and the debt that we have. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, interest rates at the beginning of the pandemic were exceptionally low to try to help the economy recover, and that resulted in really a negative burden of the debt on the U.S. economy. I think the most important measure of the burden of the debt on the U.S. is the real net interest that we have to pay.
Let me just add, Madam Secretary.
And we always projected
much. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Timmons, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chairman Powell, for being with us today. Congratulations on being confirmed to your second term as chair. You got some rocky times ahead. Wish you luck. Last time you were here, we discussed how rising interest rates really inflates debt servicing costs for the federal government. And I know what you're going to say. That's a concern for fiscal policymakers, the Congress, to take into account, not the Fed. And that is mostly true. But I still think it's worth everyone being fully aware of just how costly servicing our debt will be now that interest rates are returning to historically normal levels. According to the CBO, interest payments on the debt are the fastest growing part of the federal budget. CBO projects that servicing our debt will cost taxpayers $8.1 trillion of the 10-year budget window. $8.1 trillion. And their inflation assumptions are projected interest rates are fairly lower than current levels and quite a bit lower than where rates are likely headed to get inflation under control. And I thank you for your efforts to get inflation under control, but for every half percentage point rate hike, that is an estimated $133 billion of annual increases. I'm going to say that again, $133 billion in annual increase in debt servicing costs. That is just a staggering amount of money. So we, Congress, must get our fiscal house in order. We have to. There is no other option. The dollar's position in the world as the global reserve currency is solid, and there are no immediate signs of that changing. But if we continue on our current trajectory, that will not always be a given. So my question is, are you worried that if our current fiscal path continues, which I should note with each rate hike it looks worse and worse, that the dollar's position in the world could be challenged in the long term? Is that a concern?
Certainly in the long term. The dollar is the reserve currency, and I don't see it as particularly under threat at the moment, given the advantages that we have, which are many. But you're right, the U.S. federal budget is on an unsustainable path, and we will have to deal with it. The sooner the better. And unsustainable just means that the debt is growing faster than the economy, which by definition, over time, can't be sustained.
Thank you. For the record, I also want to follow up. You stated the following as Congress considered the Biden stimulus. Quote, in addition, workers and households who struggle to find their place in the post-pandemic economy are likely to need continued support. The same is true for many small businesses that are likely to prosper again once the pandemic is behind us. That was from your speech on February 10th of 2021. I just wanted to add that in for the record. One final question. During a meeting last week at the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, the IAIS issued a consultation paper on comparability criteria looking at the use